The dead stars blinked, their light long-traveled, long-faded. Shadows stretched across the void, trailing after the wreckage of civilizations that once flourished in the places where now only silence remained. There was no debris, no corpses, no ruins, just an empty absence where entire histories had once stood. At the center of the destruction, an enigma drifted. The Eclipse Revenant. A name whispered in dying transmissions, encoded in desperate warnings that no one had been able to heed in time. It had no allegiances, no mercy, no reasoning. The Revenant came, and a world ceased to exist. The question was not if it would strike again, but where. Far from the desolation where the hum of human civilization still pulsed against the vast nothing, Commander Elias Voss read the reports. 10 minutes ago, Cairo 7 had ceased broadcasting. The planet had not sent a distress signal, not fought, not surrendered. It had simply vanished. He leaned forward, studying the last intercepted transmission from a deep space array. A burst of static. A voice fragmented and warped. We were never meant to wake it. The data ended there, leaving only an empty file where the planetary records should have been. Voss exhaled slowly, fingers drumming against the metal console. His ship, the Sable Warden, cut through the dark at faster-than-light speeds, bearing him toward what he already knew would be nothing. He had seen it before. Planets stripped from reality, their presence erased. The Revenant was hunting, and if the patterns held, it was moving toward human space. The Terran Dominion High Command had sent orders. Find it, track it, stop it. But that was the problem. No one even understood what it was. The Revenant wasn't just a ship. It bent the laws of physics, consuming entire worlds without a trace. No survivors. No known weaknesses. Some believed it was an ancient human weapon, built and lost in wars long forgotten. Others claimed it was an alien judgment, wiping out those civilizations that grew too bold, too arrogant. But Voss knew the truth was never that simple. The bridge of the Sable Warden was bathed in the low blue glow of navigation screens, a stark contrast to the cold steel walls that boxed them in. His crew worked in tense silence, knowing their destination. Lieutenant Arden Sharp turned from her station, eyes sharp beneath the dim light. There's nothing left of Cairo 7, Commander. Her voice was steady, but Voss heard the unspoken question beneath it. Nothing left because something had ensured that nothing could remain. The ship's sensors flared. A derelict station drifted in the orbit where Cairo 7 had once turned against its sun. One structure left standing in the abyss of erasure. It was old, predating even the Dominion's expansion into this region. The station's architecture was alien, but the distress beacon pulsing from within, human-made. The realization sent a cold prickle down Voss's spine. The station had survived, not by accident. Something inside had been left behind. A message, a clue, maybe even an answer. The docking clamps engaged with a metallic hiss. The airlock cycled open, revealing the dark, silent corridors within. The emergency lighting still flickered, weak, unstable, but it was enough to see the message carved into the wall just past the entry point. The eclipsed shall rise again. They moved deeper into the station, their steps echoing through the hollow space. Ancient consoles lined the control hub, their screens shattered, long dead. The main databank sat in the center, a towering construct of cables and interfaces from an era before modern Terran technology. Voss activated his wrist uplink, bypassing ancient firewalls with Dominion decryption. The files unraveled, revealing records written in Earth-standard English, a language spoken by humans before they even left the cradle of Sol. The transmission played. A voice. Old, strained, terrified. You don't understand. You think it's a weapon. It isn't. It was never ours. We thought we built it. We thought it was lost. But we only ever woke it up. The recording glitched. Static swallowed the next few words, before the voice cut through again, desperate. If you find this, if it's still moving, you cannot stop it. You can only survive it. Voss stood motionless, the weight of the words pressing against him like the cold of deep space. They hadn't built the Revenant. They had found it, and now it was awake. The Sable Warden's comms blared, a new distress signal. Voss turned sharply, stepping toward the bridge even before Sharp's voice confirmed what he already feared. Another world had been targeted. The Revenant was moving, and this time, it was heading toward human space. The silence of deep space was never truly silent. The Sable Warden's sensors picked up the whisper of dying transmissions, the last echoes of a world that no longer existed. Voss watched the incoming data stream, his jaw tightening. The Revenant had moved. New distress beacon pulsed, this time from Valtros 3, a heavily fortified alien stronghold on the edge of neutral space. Unlike the others, Valtros 3 wasn't just another colony. It was a fortress world, home to one of the oldest interstellar civilizations, the Valethi Concord. A species older than humanity, cautious, powerful. They had never lost a war, until now. The incoming message stuttered through layers of interference, distorted and fragmented. The Valethi language was known for its composure, precise, formal, unshaken. But what came through the comms now was something else entirely, pure primal terror. We yield. We surrender. Static. You do not understand. It does not stop. It does not. The signal cut. Then came the Sable Warden's proximity alarms. They had arrived at the edge of the Valtros system. But there was no battle, no burning fleets, no orbital wreckage. Just the slow, unnatural collapse of reality itself. Where Valtros 3 had once turned against its sun, there was only a void, a tear in space rippling with distortions. Around it, the remnants of the Valethi defensive armada drifted, their once glorious warships now hollowed-out husks, not destroyed, drained. The Revenant hung beyond them, a silhouette against the dying light of the system's star. It was vast, its hull swallowing what little illumination remained, a shape more absence than presence. No visible weapons, no thruster trails, just a shadow in motion, defying the known laws of physics. And then, it turned. Not physically, not visibly, but in the way that a predator turns its attention toward the next prey. The Sable Warden systems flickered. The ship's AI went silent. Lights dimmed, screens glitched, temperature dropped. The Revenant was aware of them now. A desperate attempt at understanding Voss clenched his fists. There was no fighting this thing. The Dominion had tried. The Valethi had tried. Every species that had stood against it was now gone. But no one had ever tried talking to it. Through failing systems, Voss activated the ship's long-range transmitter. His voice was steady, though his pulse hammered in his skull. "Unknown entity," he said. "This is Commander Elias Voss of the Terran Dominion. We are not your enemy. Identify yourself." Silence. Then, the ship's comms shifted frequencies, on their own. The Revenant was answering, a voice crackled through the speakers. Not human, not alien. Something else. "You seek the hand that destroys." But who guides it? The words were spoken in flawless Earth standard, but the cadence was wrong, a slow, deliberate mimicry of human speech. Sharp stiffened. "Commander, it's speaking to us." Voss kept his voice level. "Are you autonomous? Are you acting on your own?" A hand moves only as it was willed. A static-laced hum filled the ship's speakers. Not a transmission, an intrusion. The Revenant wasn't just speaking. It was inside their systems, inside their ship. Sharp's screen flashed thousands of lines of ancient Terran script, words no modern AI should even recognize. One phrase repeated over and over: "The eclipsed shall rise again." Voss's blood ran cold. They had seen those words before, on the derelict station above Kiros 7. The Revenant hadn't just destroyed Valtros 3. It had erased it. And it wasn't finished. "Cut the comms," Voss ordered. Now. Sharp's hands flew across the controls. The ship's systems groaned back to life. The Revenant's presence receding but not vanishing. It had tested them. measured them, and then, without sound or warning, it moved again. The pattern revealed. The Sable Warden's computers struggled to restore navigation. The Revenant was gone, but it had left something behind, a single data packet. Voss opened it, a list of coordinates stretching across Dominion space. Some pointed to major colonies, others to abandoned research stations. One was marked with a red alert warning flashing ominously. It was Earth. The pattern was clear now. The Revenant wasn't attacking randomly. It was following a path, one set by something ancient, something buried deep in the history of the stars. And Earth was next. The Sable Warden hurtled through space, every system straining against the urgency that clawed at the crew's nerves. Earth was on the list. The Revenant wasn't just wiping out civilizations, it was following a path, a pattern buried in the ancient void of history. But why? Elias Voss stood rigid on the bridge, staring at the coordinates burned into the screen. Every previous target had something in common. Each world had been tied to an old war, a lost history, and now Earth was in its crosshairs. If the Revenant had followed a directive for centuries, then that meant one terrifying truth. Humanity wasn't just a bystander. It had always been part of the equation. Sharp's voice cut through the heavy silence. "Commander, we have incoming transmissions, multiple sources." The ship's comms flickered, a jumble of voices, species, languages. The galaxy had taken notice. A Vilithi warlord, scarred and vengeful, demanded explanations. A Zenkai, the diplomat, their voice laced with barely restrained panic, spoke of ancient prophecies. Even an independent Terran admiral, distrustful of Dominion command, offered uneasy cooperation. All of them had one thing in common. They feared what humanity might know, because to them the Revenant was proof of something unspoken. That maybe, just maybe, the Terrans had always been the ones holding the match that would burn the stars. Voss didn't waste time. The Revenant was faster than them, but it had a pattern. It moved like a force of nature, yet something guided it. Something they could predict. "We need to get ahead of it," he said, "before it reaches Earth." The moment the words left his mouth, the comms flared again, this time from Dominion High Command. "Commander Voss, you are ordered to stand down." The bridge went still. Voss narrowed his eyes. "Explain." The voice on the other end was clipped, impatient. "You have no clearance for this operation. Return to Dominion space immediately. Do not interfere with the Revenant's course." The Dominion knew something. Voss's grip tightened on the console. The Revenant wasn't just an enemy. It was part of a buried truth, one that his own government was trying to keep hidden. But there was no time for politics. If the Dominion wouldn't act, he would. The Revenant's next known destination wasn't Earth. Not yet. It was a world long forgotten by most. A barren, abandoned rock marked only in Dominion archives as Station Aureus. No one spoke of Arias anymore, but Voss knew its significance. It was one of the first human colonies beyond Sol, a scientific outpost, sealed and erased from records centuries ago. It was also the oldest known Terran archaeological site, one that predated humanity's own expansion. And now, the Revenant was heading straight for it. The Sable Warden arrived at Aureus ahead of the Revenant, dropping out of FTL into a graveyard of dead satellites and forgotten stations. The planet itself was lifeless, a cracked wasteland, but deep beneath its surface, hidden within layers of rock and radiation shielding, the remains of the Forbidden Archive still stood. Voss, Sharp, and a small strike team descended through ancient tunnels, their boots kicking up dust that hadn't been disturbed in centuries. The air was thin, the darkness absolute, until their lights fell upon a massive vault door still humming with faint energy. Voss stepped forward, his hand hovering over the rusted panel. The biometric scanner recognized him immediately. The door unlocked. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the weight of time. The vault stretched into a vast chamber of shattered terminals and crumbling databanks. But in the center, one console still blinked, A single preserved log. Sharp activated it. The holographic display flickered, revealing an ancient Terran scientist, his face drawn with exhaustion, his voice a whisper against the static. This is Dr. Aldrin Voss. Final entry. Before the lockdown. Before we bury it for good. Voss stiffened. His name. His own bloodline. We thought we were the first. The scientist's voice cracked. That humanity was alone in its rise to the stars. We were wrong. We weren't the first, we weren't even the second. The screen shifted, revealing star charts, marking the very worlds the Revenant had already erased. They were here before us. Before any of us. The Eclipsed Lords. Voss's pulse pounded. That name again, the same phrase the Revenant had broadcast. We didn't defeat them. We survived them. By locking them away, by silencing the past. But history doesn't stay buried forever. It rises again. And when it does, something must keep the silence. The final image burned into the display. Ship, massive, unholy in design. The Revenant. It wasn't a weapon of war, it was a warden, and it was following its ancient programming. Eliminate any civilization advanced enough to unlock what lay buried. Sharp's breath was uneven. Commander, Earth isn't just a target. Voss finished the thought for her. It's the final seal. The Revenant wasn't coming to destroy humanity. It was coming to judge them. And if it found them guilty, if it determined that humanity had reached too far too soon, then Earth would vanish just as the others had. The Revenant wasn't just a machine. It was the last surviving creation of the Eclipsed Lords. A final enforcer, carrying out an extinction order issued before humans had even walked the Earth. The Sable Warden's comms flared. The Revenant had arrived in system. They were out of time. Voss turned to his crew. They had one chance. Option 1, find a way to shut the Revenant down, but if it had destroyed over 100 worlds, what chance did they have? Option 2, reprogram it, redirect it. But to do that, they needed to understand its core directive. What criteria it used to judge civilizations, and option 3. Voss exhaled. Option 3 was unthinkable. If the Revenant truly was an executioner, then there might be only one way to satisfy its directive. A sacrifice so vast it might spare the rest of humanity. Destroy Earth before the Revenant could. Silence fell on the bridge. No one spoke. No one dared breathe, because the choice they made next would decide whether humanity continued to exist at all. The Sable Warden trembled as the Revenant arrived in system, a shadow swallowing the stars. There was no grand entrance, no bright rupture of space-time. It was just there, suddenly and absolutely, like it had always existed, waiting for them to perceive it. The ship's hull temperature plummeted. Lights flickered. The engines groaned under the strain of an unseen force. On the bridge, Elias Voss stood unmoving, watching the thing that had erased entire civilizations now turning toward Earth. A slow, deliberate movement, like a final judgment, a countdown that had already begun. The crew waited, for orders, for clarity, for something that didn't come. Sharp's voice cut through the cold air. Commander, it's broadcasting again. The ship's systems did not receive a transmission. The Revenant was speaking directly into their minds. The cycle nears its end. The words weren't spoken. They arrived like thoughts that weren't their own. A hand moves only as it was willed, and now the hand must decide. The Revenant was waiting for something. A choice. Option 1. Attack. The Dominion had tried. The Valithi had tried. The combined strength of entire civilizations had shattered against the Revenant's silent force. Attacking it would be futile, and worse, it might accelerate its judgment. Earth wouldn't be given a slow erasure. It would simply vanish. Option 2. Override the directive. If the Revenant was acting on ancient programming, then maybe, just maybe, there was a way to manipulate it. But to do that, they had to understand the criteria it used to judge civilizations. What made a world unworthy to exist? And worse, what if the criteria had already been met? Option 3. Preemptive strike. Destroy Earth before the Revenant could. Wipe out everything, all traces of humanity, so that there was nothing left to judge. The unthinkable, the absolute. The last final choice, the only choice that guaranteed the Revenant would leave. Voss's hand tightened into a fist. They had seconds to decide. Voss made his decision. We board it. Silence. The crew stared at him. Sharp was the first to speak. That thing kills everything it touches. Not everything, Voss said. Not us. Not yet. The Revenant had never attacked first. It had waited, measured, assessed. Maybe it wasn't just an executioner. Maybe it was something else, something still listening. Voss turned to the crew. Either we find a way to shut it down from inside, or we end up just another dead world in its wake. The decision was made. They moved. The Sable Warden launched a stealth pod, barely a pinprick of movement in the Revenant's vast, unknowable mass. As they closed the distance, the stars around them began to fade, not due to movement. The Revenant was absorbing light itself. Their pod touched the hull. No landing sequence, no airlock, just cold, endless metal beneath them, and then the hull opened for them. A passage revealed itself, spiraling downward into a void not made for human minds. Voss went first. They entered the darkness. The inside was impossible. No machinery. No hallways. Just shapes shifting in the dark. Geometry that defied logic. Corridors that led nowhere until they did. The Revenant's core was alive, but not in any way they understood. And at the center, the judgment terminal. Not a throne. Not a control panel. Just a presence coiled in the black void. Waiting. Voss stepped forward. The weight of unseen eyes pressed down on him. He asked the only question that mattered. Why? The response wasn't words. It was memory. The Revenant opened its mind to him. He saw the past. Not just human history, but something older, millions of years older. A civilization that had ruled the stars before any of them. The Eclipsed Lords. They were gods in their time, conquerors of physics, architects of the cosmos. They had shaped reality itself, until something destroyed them. And the Revenant had been left behind. Not as a weapon, not as a conqueror, but as the last survivor. Its directive had been twisted by time. It wasn't just erasing civilizations. It was stopping history from repeating, because the Eclipsed Lords hadn't been killed. They had buried themselves, locked away beneath the very worlds the Revenant was now wiping clean. And Earth. Earth was the last key. Voss saw the paths before him. Option 1. Shut it down. If he could override the Revenant's command, he could stop it, but that meant the Eclipsed Lords might awaken. Option 2. Let it complete its mission. If he did nothing, Earth would be erased, humanity would end, but the galaxy would remain safe. Option 3. Reprogram it. The most dangerous choice. Not to stop the Revenant, not to destroy it, but to redirect it. To send it somewhere else. Somewhere worse. Voss made his choice. He reached into the control void, his mind sinking with the last remnant of a dead civilization. The Revenant hesitated. For the first time in its existence, it paused. And then it turned. Not toward Earth, not toward Dominion space, but toward a distant, dark system. One buried deep in the void. Untouched for eons, it left. The Revenant was gone, but not destroyed, not stopped, simply redirected toward the place the Eclipsed Lords had been waiting. Voss collapsed onto the floor of the Sable Warden. His body was intact. His mind was not. He had felt the weight of a civilization older than stars, had seen the edges of something that should not exist. Earth was safe. For now. But in the depths of space, beyond all known charts, something stirred. And this time, it was waking up. The Revenant was gone. Or at least it was no longer here. Voss stood at the bridge of the Sable Warden, staring at the empty void where the machine had once loomed. It had turned away, disappearing into the unknown, leaving Earth, untouched, leaving history on the edge of a knife. But the choice he made wasn't victory, it was only a delay. He knew it. His crew knew it. The Dominion knew it. And somewhere in the depths of uncharted space, the Eclipsed Lords knew it too. The Sable Warden floated in orbit above Earth, awaiting orders that had not yet come. The Dominion High Command had gone silent. No congratulations. No reprimand. Just a long, uneasy quiet from the ones who had tried to keep this buried, because now the truth was out. The Revenant was not a Terran weapon. It was not an anomaly. It was a warning system, and humanity had just hacked it, redirected it toward you, the prison of something far worse. But had they truly stopped it? Or had they just bought time before the next reckoning? Voss knew the answer. This wasn't an ending. It was the start of something bigger. Inside the war room of an orbital station, the greatest leaders of the Dominion sat in tense silence. Admirals, scientists, politicians, even rogue agents of independent, Terran factions, and all eyes were on Elias Voss, a man who had broken orders, a man who had looked into the abyss and lived to tell of it. No one spoke at first. They all wanted someone else to be the first to say it. Finally, an older official, her uniform crisp and eyes burning with barely concealed fear, leaned forward. Where? Did you send it? Voss's gaze didn't waver. To the edge of the void. A pause. The weight of implication settled over the room like a storm waiting to break. The older woman exhaled. So? You didn't destroy it? Voss's voice was steady. It wasn't ours to destroy. Someone slammed a hand on the table. A general. Furious. Afraid. You've damned us all, he growled. We should have what? Voss cut in, his voice cold, sharp, final. Destroyed the one thing holding something even worse at bay? You think that would have saved us? Silence. Because they all knew the truth. There had been no right choice, only the one that let them keep breathing a little longer. Later, alone in his quarters, Voss replayed the last fragments of the Revenant's data. A single file remained. 1. Last transmission. It was old, centuries, maybe millennia old. A voice lost in time, its owner long dead. The Eclipsed shall rise again. Voss shut off the screen. That much he already knew, because even though the Revenant was gone, something was waking up, and when it did, humanity would have to answer for what they had done. The stars had not changed. From the viewport of the Sable Warden, Earth turned slowly beneath them, bathed in the soft glow of its moon. Untouched. Still alive. Still thriving. But for how long? Voss stood at the edge of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the planet he had just saved, or sentenced. The choice he had made hung over him like a silent shadow. The Revenant was gone, but the real war had not even begun. A priority transmission came through the encrypted Dominion network, classified, urgent, untraceable. Sharp read it once, twice. Her breath caught in her throat. "Commander," she said, voice tight. "You need to see this." The message was short, barely a sentence. The void has changed. Attached were new deep space scans. Voss took one look and felt his stomach turn to ice. The Revenant's final destination, the uncharted dead system where he had sent it, was gone, not destroyed, not erased, just empty, as if the very fabric of space had been torn apart. And from the farthest edges of the galaxy a new signal pulsed, a frequency older than the Revenant, older than humanity, a signal that had not been heard in over 100 million years. It was not Terran, not alien. It was them, the Eclipsed Lords. Voss exhaled slowly, setting the datapad down. The weight of the message pressed against him. The Revenant had not been a weapon. It had been a warning, a barrier, a last defense against something buried, beneath time. And he had sent it straight into the heart of the abyss. For the first time in untold millennia, the silence was breaking. Something was awake. And it was coming.